Well, it might be 2022, but supermarket purchasing limits are back. Coles this week rationing the sale of some items as it struggles with major staff shortages.
Thousands of workers are in isolation as the Omicron variant surges, and some leading economists say that this is just the beginning.
Let's bring in one of those economists now, Director at the Centre for Future Work, Jim Stanford, who joins us live from Canada. Good morning to you, Jim. As more and more workers get sick, how bad do you think this situation is likely to get?
Oh, it's going to get very bad in the next few weeks, Jane. There's no doubt about it. Typically in Australia, on a given day, you might see 3 or 4% of the workforce off sick. That's going to grow 10 times. I won't be surprised if we'd see a third of the workers in hard-hit places like New South Wales off the job, either because they have COVID, they've been exposed to COVID, or they have to care for someone at home, like kids whose childcare centres have been closed because of COVID. So it's going to be enormously disruptive to virtually every industry in our economy.
The government has moved beyond lockdowns to get the economy roaring again, but you believe that was backward thinking in some ways?
Well, many of the political leaders often tried to put up this kind of false dichotomy between protecting public health and protecting the economy. And economists never accepted that argument. Most of the economists were telling them, no, the best way to protect the economy is to limit the spread of COVID and limit the amount of contagion that's going on. And now we've had, in a way, a very unfortunate experiment where we've seen some governments, such as the New South Wales government, just open up, in kind of an image that we're going to be tough, we're going to stare down COVID, we're going to get back to life as normal. And obviously that can't happen. So today in New South Wales and Sydney, for example, economic activity is lower than at any point in any lockdown. So effectively, we're suffering at least as much pain as a lockdown, but with terrible health outcomes. So this idea that we could protect the economy by letting it rip never made sense, and we're seeing the consequences now.
What are the consequences going to be, Jim, do you think, for individual businesses?
Oh, sure. I mean, there's no sector that is immune from what's happening. We've obviously seen the problem in supermarkets, in logistics, in transportation. The problem is doubly acute in any kind of essential public service like healthcare, childcare centers, because there, first of all, the workers themselves are exposed to the virus because they're working on the front lines. But then when those centers shut down, then other workers are prevented from going to work, even if they've been able to avoid contagion. Individual businesses, of course, in every sector of the economy are struggling to try to figure out how they'll continue. And the reality is consumers are voting with their feet. Even though there isn't an official lockdown in place, they're quite rightly staying home to protect their health. So there's going to be a problem faced by businesses that way. The greatest irony is, unlike in a real lockdown, we don't have the same government supports for those workers and those businesses that we had earlier in the COVID, because somehow we're pretending that we're getting back to normal. And so in a way, we have the worst of both worlds.
This situation is playing out not just in Australia, but right around the world. We all know many people, multiple people who are either close contacts or have got the thing. Do you believe that we were unprepared for this next stage of the pandemic, which we kind of believe is going to blow itself out in a few weeks? Is that realistic?
Well, Richard, I think there is a lack of preparation, clearly, and we've seen that throughout the pandemic with problems with the quarantine system, with the vaccination rollouts, now with the testing. So certainly there's a lack of good planning. But even worse, I think, is that there was a deliberate policy decision that was made. You had some government officials that said, this is going to look good if I puff up my chest and say we're not going to be defeated by COVID, we're going to get out and get on with life as normal. And both the epidemiologists and the economists told them that was wrong. But they saw some kind of political advantage by looking tough, and they let it rip. And in a way, it's bad enough to be unprepared, Richard. I think it's unforgivable to put people's lives at risk because you saw some kind of political advantage in it. And that's why Australia now has one of the worst contagion rates, worse than America, 4 times worse than Germany, where you can get a free rat test on almost any street corner, because our government's made that political choice.
Yeah, I still can't believe that it's turned into a means test whether you can get a rapid antigen test. Yeah. Jim, we appreciate your time. All the best to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
bottom 20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas